Scripture reading for today is taken from Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 through 24. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust does corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust does corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thy eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light is that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon.
Good morning. Good to be back with you again. I'm really looking forward to the week ahead, and I want to let you know that this week I'm here for you. I'm here to help you, not just from the pulpit, but if anybody has Bible questions or spiritual concerns or anything that you want to talk about, I'd be glad to talk with you at any point in time this week to try to help you in that. And so if you want to study privately or grab a cup of coffee or something like that, I don't know where you get coffee around here, but you're also welcome to come out to the Lewis Bed and Breakfast. And I've got a house that Carl said, make sure you let people know they're welcome to come to your house. And so we might have a party one night, Carl, just have everybody up that steep driveway and everybody hang out. But Carl and Bonnie, looking forward to the week ahead with them. But if you want to come out and talk more, just feel free to do that this week. I won't be there tomorrow morning. I'm going to my old dentist and getting my teeth worked on while I'm here. But I'll be here the rest of the week after that. Looking forward also to the sermons. If you've got a sermon list, some of what we're talking about today hopefully will be helpful. Tonight was a request from the elders, kind of talk about that, as that's a situation that I know that you're kind of in right now, thinking about the situation of evangelism and how you're going to handle evangelism and things like that. And so we'll be speaking about the work and the benefits of the local evangelist this evening. But throughout the rest of the week, those should be lessons that are good for believers and unbelievers. I've preached why my family needs the Bible quite a bit. And so Monday night should be a great lesson for people outside of the congregation who you want to try to get them to consider why the Bible could be helpful to them in their marriage and as parents and as individuals and their families. Tuesday night, we're thinking about the original Ethiopian eunuch. And so that's a lesson that I've just recently started preaching that has gone over really well, and enjoy preaching it. And it actually has to do with how we talk to one another about the gospel, not just teaching the truth, but teaching it with love. And so I'm looking forward to that lesson Tuesday night. Wednesday night, thinking about Titus chapter 2 and mentoring. That's another topic that the elders mentioned to me. If we can talk a little bit more about mentoring older men, older women, younger women. And so we'll look at Titus 2 as a template for that. And then on Thursday, looking forward to Thursday night's lesson, Friday night's lesson, both of those. Thursday night, One More Night with the Frogs, just a classic old lesson that I love to preach as well, from Pharaoh and the Exodus. And Friday nights, if you're missing Friday night, man, that's good stuff. So you should come Friday night. One good reason to be a Christian. Give me one good reason to be a Christian. If you've got friends who are not Christians, who you've been thinking about inviting Friday night, we'll give them the best reason they need to think about starting a relationship with Jesus Christ. But today we're thinking about making the right investments. Now, look, if you came here today thinking that I was going to give you financial advice. Well, I'm sorry, that's not what we're doing today. I'm not giving any financial advice. I'm not the person to do that. Instead, we're looking at Matthew chapter 6 as a template for some spiritual advice that Jesus gives us in the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus introduces two areas in which we can lay up our treasures. And he says here, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. That's here, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. There's a few principles here which I believe are foundational, and they are transformational to the sustainment and to the development of our faith. And so today, I want you to think for a while on a spiritual level about making the right investments. And the first thing that we learn from this short text, we're just going to be right here in Matthew 6 and these 3 verses this morning. That's it. But the first thing that we learn is that we choose the nature of our investments. We choose the nature of our investments. We're not talking here about what house you will buy, what car you will purchase, what stock that you're going to invest in today. We have a choice as to whether we will invest our lives into earthly or spiritual things. And so there's 2 choices presented in verse 19. You can lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. Now, what might that be? Well, treasures, earthly treasures, can be something as big as houses. We can invest in our houses. We can invest in land. We can invest in things that are much smaller than that, though. We can invest in our coins, which might be a hobby for some. We can invest in spending time so that we can get trophies and ribbons and medals in sports, so that we can have little pieces of paper that we can frame and put on our walls, which indicate our degrees. Those are earthly investments. You can invest heavily in those things, or you can lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And God gives you the free will to make a choice as to whether you will pursue in your life, whether your primary pursuit is going to be for material things and after earthly things, or whether you're going to pursue in your life spiritual things. But you have the choice. Now, the second thing that we learn from this text is that investments require sacrifice and self-control. So here's what that means. If you're going to lay up a treasure, in other words, you maybe take that money, you're going to put that money in the bank, or you're going to take that time and you're going to buy all those materials and you're going to invest in a house, or you're going to take money and buy land, or you're going to take time to develop your body physically so that you can be elite athlete or academically, or maybe your thing is music. But if you're going to lay up a treasure in one specific area, whatever that area is, then you're going to have to sacrifice something to do it, right? It's pretty simple. If I choose, for example, to invest in funding my retirement, preachers aren't like normal people out there in the world who that's part of the package that you signed with when you got your job. I have to invest in funding my retirement from what I make, because we don't have group 401ks and health insurance and life insurance and all those sorts of things. So if I'm going to do that, then there might be times where I have to choose that this year I can't take a really expensive vacation, because if I take that vacation for 1 week, I have to cut out on my funding my retirement for, when I retire someday, because I'm going to get old someday. I'm already getting older. Okay, but you have to sacrifice to do one thing. If I choose to buy a new car, well, if I buy a new car this year and I've got a new car payment that I've got to make, then I may not be able to remodel my bathroom in order to do so. So sacrifice is involved in investment. If you invest in one thing, you have to sacrifice another. Now, looking at the text before us, choosing to focus on material things may very well lead to a lack of investment in spiritual treasures, and vice versa. Sometimes if I invest in spiritual things, it means that I've got to give up my focus on some of these material things. Take a look at Matthew chapter 6 and verse 24. And ultimately, this was the conclusion of what Jesus had just said. He says in verse 24, no one can serve two masters. It's going to be very difficult for you to invest in spiritual material and be able to keep both of those priorities at the same time. It says either he will hate the one and love the other, he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. God and your money, God and your, it's not just money, it's material things. And so the question that we have to ask as we are investing our life into something is, are my life's investments truly worth what I am sacrificing to be invested? If I am investing myself, for example, fully into work, is it worth the time that I'm sacrificing not to bring up my own children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord? If I'm at work from 6 in the morning until 10 o'clock at night and I'm only around my kids when they're in bed, is that worth the time that I'm spending working, that I'm not with my own children, doing what God tells me to do, to spend some time bringing them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord? If I'm investing all of my energy into my physical house, I've been there, done that. I've had a fixer-upper. I've had a house that I had to invest a lot of time in. There's sacrifices that take place when you do that, but is it worth what I'm missing out on with God's family? And for some people, house kind of becomes God. The yard has to be perfect. The flowers have to be perfect. The furniture has to be perfect. Everything is worked on constantly. And we are so busy working on our house and our land and our property and mowing and all those things that we don't really have much time for God's family after we've invested in that. If I'm investing so much in sports and band and hobbies, is it worth it if I have to sacrifice Bible study and worship and being with my brethren on a regular basis? If I'm investing my life into my college education, by the way, I'm not saying that any of these things are necessarily sinful in and of themselves. I mean, we have to work. God calls us to work. That's a part of our life. God calls us to, have homes and to take care of our homes and be good stewards. The question I'm asking is, if you're spending so much time investing your life in your college education or continuing education, and that's causing you to sacrifice spiritual edification time, is it really worth that type of investment? If I'm investing so much into physical me, I'm always shopping for the right clothes. I've always got to have the nails done. I'm always getting the hair done. I've got to have the perfect shoes. If I'm always investing in physical me, am I neglecting to love my less fortunate and needy brethren because I'm so into me? You choose the nature of your investments, and what you choose to focus on in life is going to require a sacrifice in some other area. And so is it worth it? It's also going to require some self-control to invest in those things, because it takes self-discipline to invest. Well, how do we know whether or not it's worth it? Well, that's where our next point comes in here, what Jesus says. The worth of an investment is seen in its return. My wife just started, my parents have a 25-acre farm. I grew up doing landscaping because they own a landscaping business. My brother's a landscape architect, and I've got another brother who works for the business. They do landscaping and firewood, and they do commercial snow in the wintertime for properties. And they've also got a U-pick farm that we started when I lived in Indiana previously for blueberries and blackberries and strawberries. So there's a lot going on there. And my wife just started working for them. They're opening up a bakery barn and a coffee shop, and she's going to start running that. And they got a 401k program. And I was just taking a look at all the different places where you can invest your 401k in that particular program and choosing which ones we were going to invest in. Well, of course, you don't invest in the ones that are the very worst earners, do you? That's not a very good investment. You may not invest in ones that have been the best earners for the past couple of years either, because they might be aggressive. And if the economy tanks, then that might be a very risky investment. Okay. But what we choose to invest in, we try to be wise about it, as wise as we possibly can, so that we get the best return that we can get out of it, right? The worth of an investment is seen in its return. And so what is the return if I invest in material treasures? Well, this passage says, don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. Jesus is saying that's not the best investment, because moth and rust destroy, and thieves might break in and steal. What Jesus is saying is, if you invest in material things, and you've invested in something that is just temporal. Matthew 6:19, treasures on earth ultimately result in a situation where things are going to wear out. Clothes get old, clothes get out of style. How many of you have invested in some clothes one season, and then a year later, you're like, I can't wear that. That's not in style. Right? That's what happens with clothes sometimes. Cars rust and they wear down. How many of you bought a brand new car and then 10 years later, maybe you're looking for another car? I just got rid of my car after about 10 years. It was nice when I first got it. It's not as nice now. They rust, they wear down, the engines break down. Grain molds. Grain gets eaten by mice. So if you're a farmer, you can't leave that grain there forever. It goes bad. Thieves and burglars can loot, can pillage and steal. How many of you have been stolen from before? Something that you invested in. We used to live in our first house was this little 1,100 square foot house on a really busy street. I had to park on the street. And I had a nice stereo system in my truck. It was my first truck that I ever had. I think I got stolen twice. I replaced it. It got stolen again. People steal things. Material things get stolen. Earthly treasures come with only one real guarantee. And you can invest in the stock market, by the way, and it might go down. There might be good years where it goes up, but it might go down. Earthly treasures come with only one real guarantee, and that guarantee is you can't take it with you. So even if your investments do well, at some point, your life is going to end, and you're not going to take that house with you, and you're not going to take that bank account with you, and the clothes are going to stay in your closet, and the shoes are going to stay where you put your shoes. And somebody's going to inherit your car, as nice as it might be. I've never seen a U-Haul following a hearse, right? There's no pockets in a shroud, is an old saying. Well, what is the return if we invest in heavenly treasures? Take a look here in verse 20. Lay up for yourselves. Jesus says, here's the better choice. And the better choice doesn't necessarily have to do with how life's going to be right here, right now. The better choice is a better choice because of what Jesus says it accomplishes long term. Because if you lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, neither moth nor rust destroys, and thieves do not break in and steal. We receive for our investment a far greater treasure than what we invested when we invest in spiritual things. With that in mind, ought the bulk of our life's focus be on material things or be on spiritual things? And when I want to illustrate that with an illustration that for me makes sense. Eternity is a hard thing to really grasp in my mind. And trying to define eternity can be difficult to grasp. But I want you to imagine for just a moment here that I have a really long white rope, all right? And I have just a little bucket of paint, little bucket that I can just hold with one hand here. And I take this really long rope and I dip this really long rope down into the bucket of paint, and I just kind of cover the tip of that rope. This rope is so long, all right, that I can wrap this rope around the walls of this building, and I can wrap it around this building so many times that literally we can have a rope siding, okay? And so you can't even see the walls or the doors or the windows or the big screens or anything like that anymore. And that rope actually goes out the door and it just keeps on going. You can walk as far as you can walk and you'll never come to the end of it. That's a long rope, right? Well, what you dip down in the paint, you know what that is? That's your life right now. It's your life. Even if you live to be 110 years old, that's your life. You know what the rest of the rope is? It's eternity. And a lot of times what we are living for is for that little bitty bit that we've dipped down into the bucket of paint instead of living for eternity. Endless time. The reason why Jesus says the better investment is to invest in spiritual things is because Jesus understands what eternity is. Jesus, the one who is God, who came from God to live on earth and who is now back with God, sitting on his right hand. Jesus understands eternity and he wants us to grasp it. Are our investments worth it? Now, the last thing that I want you to see, the last point, where we're going to spend the most of our time here in this lesson is this. Investment leads to interest. And that's what I think the final point that he makes in verse 21 is. How can I get people to be interested in that long-term spiritual investment? Investment will lead to increased interest. Look at verse 21. Jesus lays down another principle. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Anybody who has money invested in stocks and things like that, do you check it on your phone regularly? Some of you probably do, I would think. We've got that little app, right? See how the Dow Jones is doing, see how the investments are doing. We're interested in it. Some of you who have properties and lands, barns and things like that, you go out and check the property. I don't know if anybody here is a farmer and you've got animals. You just kind of leave the animals for days and weeks and don't check on them. No, you think about those animals. You think about those properties. You think about your land. You think about it. Your heart is there. It's naturally there because that's your investment. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, does anybody feel this way when you think about the culture in which we live today? Do you ever feel like it is greatly concerning that we live in a culture that just doesn't seem interested in the gospel? And there are a lot of people who don't seem interested in spiritual things. Well, why is that the case? Why is it that people don't seem interested? Well, quite simply, for many people, they have grown up under the influence of a highly secularized worldview motivated by the American dream of prosperity, right? That's the American dream. And when the American dream is on prosperity and money and nice houses and nice cars, then the emphasis is placed on a life of earthly success and on a life of earthly pleasures. And so in their worldview, in the American dream worldview, to have earthly success, here's what you have to have. You need money, right? And so we have guys shooting music videos, making it rain with the money, okay? Because money has become a god to some. We need a nice house. And so we watch TV shows. They're all about kind of remodeling houses. And here's where the real housewives of this city and that city. Here's the mansions they live in. Here's their castles. Because they're living the American dream. And that's awesome. We need a nice car. For some, it's political power. You've got to have that in order to be successful. You got to have power. Now, to get money, what do you have to get money? Well, you need to either get yourself a college education so that you can be one of the higher earners, we think. Good grades will help you get that. And you also, it doesn't help to know some people, to have some social promotion there. Or maybe if you're lucky, you can become an elite athlete and you can make a lot of money doing that. So what happens is when our focus gets put on material things, the American dream and prosperity, then the spiritual becomes unimportant in our hearts, because the supreme sign of a successful life, it's climbing the corporate ladder, it's drinking to the fullest of all the joys that this earth can offer. And so when that becomes what our culture is built on, then the hearts of many in the world have not been cultivated to appreciate the eternal blessings that God has to offer, but the temporal blessings that this world has to offer. But from the worldview of Jesus, it's very different from the worldview that our culture presents. From the worldview of Jesus, you can acquire all of this earthly success, and according to Jesus, you can actually still be a fool and you can be a failure. Take a look at Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. Another one of my favorite sermons comes from this text, but I already preached it in Bellsville a couple of years ago, so I can't preach it here. Luke 12, verses 13 through 21. It says, one from the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But Jesus said, "Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you?" I like how Jesus, sometimes he just doesn't get involved in other people's messes. There's some issues that Jesus gets involved in. There's some issues where Jesus says, that's none of my business. I'm not getting into that. Verse 15, he said, "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses." He says, the real problem here is that you're a covetous person. That's why you're allowing this fight over inheritance to divide your family relationships. Don't let a fight over inheritance ruin your family relationships, Jesus would say to him. In verse 16, he gives this parable based upon what he has just witnessed. And he says, the ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. He thought within himself, saying, what shall I do? I have no room to store my crops. He said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns. I will build greater. I will store all my crops and my goods. I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. This guy's living what we would call American dream, right? He's prospering. He's making money. He's building bigger barns. He's getting to retirement age. He's ready to retire, kick up his feet, and he's going to eat good the rest of his life. And God says, fool. Fool. Why? Because he says, this night your soul will be required of you. And then whose will those things be which you have provided? Because you're thinking in terms of material and earthly things, and you haven't thought at all about spiritual things. I don't think it's a sin to be prosperous. I don't think it's a sin to be successful and to have material treasures. We can use those things for a lot of good in the spiritual world, but it is a sin when we focus so much on those things that we have no time for spiritual things, and God gets pushed out of the picture. Following Jesus is no guarantee of worldly success. One of the things that Jesus said when he was on earth, he says, if someone wanted to follow him, he says, foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests. I don't have anywhere to lay my head. And so are you sure you want to follow me? Jesus was saying to him. I don't even have somewhere to sleep sometimes. I get kicked out of synagogues and cities sometimes because of what I'm preaching. In fact, being a Christian may lead to earthly struggles. When you read Matthew chapter 10, it's about sometimes the struggles that exist within our own families, within our own homes, because we're living a life dedicated to Christ. The life of the apostles was not a life of earthly pleasures. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 4, and what you learn about Paul and what his choices led to was that people actually thought of Paul and the apostles as fools. Because people think if you're not living for the material dreams of life, and if you don't live for power and for prestige and for popularity and for material success, then you don't really get this life. And so Paul and the apostles, who weren't men of prestige from the world's perspective, it says in verse 9, I think that God has displayed us, the apostles, last as men condemned to death. People thought, why are you living for this? You guys are getting killed for this. We have been made a spectacle to the world, to angels and to men. We are fools for Christ's sake, but you are wise in Christ. We are weak, but you are strong. You are distinguished. We are dishonored. To the present hour, we hunger and thirst. We don't even have food sometimes. We are poorly clothed. No, we don't dress with the same style that other people dress with. We are beaten. We are homeless. We don't have a home because we follow Jesus. We labor, working with our own hands, being reviled, we bless, being persecuted, we endure, being defamed, we entreat. We have been made as the filth of the world, the offscouring of all things until now. Why do you do it then, Paul? Because Paul saw that there was a much greater reward than what this earth could offer. So he didn't care that he was a fool for Christ. And that's a hard thing for people to grasp. The life of the apostles was not a life of earthly pleasure, and there's no guarantee of that if you follow Christ, but it was a life that produced a powerful return on investment that far too many are not long-sighted enough to see. What did Jesus say before he was about to be betrayed in John chapter 16, verse 33? To comfort his disciples, he says to them in that passage, he says that in this world you will have tribulation. But be of good cheer, because I've overcome the world. You're going to see when I'm raised from the dead that there's something far beyond this world. And you can have it too, if you'll overcome the tribulations of this world. And for this reason, the apostles, when they saw the resurrected Jesus, the apostles were cowards before Jesus was resurrected. When he died, they fled, they hid, they cowered in the upper room, sad that Jesus was gone, saying, oh my, what are we going to do now? I guess we might as well go back to our work, start fishing again. And then when Jesus was raised, these people become emboldened, unafraid to stand up to anyone and everyone in any situation because they saw this investment is real. There's something beyond this life. After death, there's hope for us. And so we're not going to be afraid of anything. And so Peter, who denies Jesus, becomes the first preacher of Jesus in Acts chapter 2. All the men who scattered and fled Jesus, well, after the resurrection, they scattered and started teaching the gospel across the world. We realize that those outside of Christ may not be interested, and so part of that is because of our worldview, and we've got to change that worldview. And part of that is just changing people's mind about Jesus, understanding why we can believe and trust and should live for him. But here's another question that sometimes comes to mind, and that is, how is it that we can get Christians more interested in this great work? I get why people outside of the church and outside of Christ may not be interested. A lot of that is changing perspective. But why is it that people who are in the church, who are in Christ, sometimes they don't seem very invested either? Why is it that some so-called Christians seem so uninterested in sharing and talking to people about the gospel and the good news and getting involved in the work of the church? And the answer, according to Jesus, is also right here. The answer is an issue of investment. Investment. If you put your treasure somewhere, your heart will go along with it. Members of churches will not be interested in the work of the church if they don't invest in the work of the church. Let's illustrate that. Okay? Have you ever had this issue as an adult? Have you ever laid in bed at night and thought to yourself, did I lock the back door? Did I lock the front door? Did I lock my car doors? Did I close the garage door? Have you ever laid there and thought that? I've been there. And because once I'm in bed, I don't want to get out of it. I just lay there and think about it for a long time until I decide to do something. And sometimes I just wake up in the middle of the night thinking, did I lock the front door? Did I lock the car? Hopefully no one's in my garage rummaging around right now. Why is it that we care about whether or not we locked the doors, closed the garage? Because we've invested in our house, right? We've invested in the things in our house. I have a toolbox that's in my garage and I don't want my tools stolen. I don't want my power tool stolen. I don't want my blower missing in the morning when I come downstairs because someone stole it and went and pawned it somewhere. I don't want the change that might be in my car stolen. Or if I have a briefcase that I left in there, I don't want that stolen out of there. I have kids in my house. I don't want something bad to happen to them by some burglar who comes into my house and decides to do something bad. Do you know what's interesting to me is that while I lie awake at night, and my wife will lie awake at night about some of those things, my kids never do. Right? And you kids, anybody that's kind of elementary age, you guys ever see a few kids right there? You guys ever lie awake at night thinking, did mom and dad lock the front door? You do? You're a good kid. I like you. I wish I had a kid like you. My kids don't. My kids don't care if the front door, the back door is locked, or the garage door is closed, or if my car is locked. Why? They haven't invested in it. It's not their money. It's not their stuff. They don't really care. They haven't really thought too much about whether or not something might happen to it if it's not unlocked. Okay? Our heart cares about what we invest in. If you begin investing your time, your talents, your treasures into the kingdom, I want to promise you something. You will become more interested in it. Think about this. Think about this more on a physical level. When I was younger, I thought, around high school age, I thought my parents were kind of evil because they made me buy a car. My friends, their parents bought them cars, and they made me work and buy my own car. And then when I went to college, they made me pay for my own college. And I thought, I've got friends whose parents are paying for their college. And then I actually lived in a house for the 5 years I was in college that my parents owned, and they made me pay rent in their house. And I thought, why do I have to do these things? Well, let me tell you, if I invested in it, then you know what happens is I really cared about the investment. Okay? I was making those truck payments. I didn't want to wreck that truck. I was invested in that college education. I did not want to flunk a single class because that meant I was going to have to pay for those credit hours again and retake the class if I flunked out. I was invested in the house, and maybe if I don't take care of it, they're going to make me pay a deposit when I move out. The good news is, by the way, I was out of money by my 5th year of college, and they forgave me of the 6 months that I was there, the last 6 months of the debt that I owed them for not paying, which I was thankful for. I had some of those friends, though, who didn't make their own car payments. You know what they were doing with their car? Driving at 100 miles an hour down county roads and flipping it and driving drunk, wrecking it. And they didn't care because mom and dad were going to buy a new one anyway. They weren't caring about the investment because they weren't the ones invested. I had friends that dropped out of college and gave up. I'm not saying you have to pay for your kids' college or no, that's totally up to you. But I did have friends that went there and didn't really care about making good grades and flunking and dropping out because mom and dad were paying for it anyway. So they weren't invested in it. So they weren't as interested in it. And we've all known people, right, who have had rentals. Anybody here have a rental property? And you have people that you rent to, and they don't care if they destroy your rental property because it's not their house. And so they leave it trashed, looking like garbage because they're not invested in it like you are. But you care when you come and find that situation, right? Why does a deadbeat dad care less about his kids than a single mom who's been raising those kids by herself and put her heart and her soul and her time and has gotten up early and changed those diapers and taken care of that kid through the night, gotten that kid to school, worked another job? Why is it that she sometimes, we see that, why does she care more? Because she's invested in that child. She's worked hard to invest. And any parent who invests in their child is going to be more interested in that child. Why does my child care more about a broken mug that they created in an art class that didn't really cost them a dime except for the time it took to paint it, put it in the kiln, and bring it home? Why do they care more about that than when they drop the glasses that I paid for and the china that's in our home? Why do they care more when that's broken? Because they invested in it. And when they see that mom and dad broke the gift that they gave them, their hearts kind of hurt because they invested. When we invest in anything, we are naturally more interested. Those who do not invest are usually the least interested in the outcome. So how does that principle work spiritually? I've been to Barbados on 2 preaching trips. I've tried to schedule a third 3 different times through COVID, and it's been canceled every time because of COVID. But before I went there and preached and worked with the brethren down there, I wasn't really interested in what was going on down there. I didn't even know there were churches down there, brethren or people, and had no idea what was going on. But once you take 2 weeks out of your year, you've got 52 weeks in a year, and you took 2 weeks out of your year to go down there and to knock on doors, and you eat in people's homes, and you train young preachers, and you preach to lost souls, and you baptize those souls into Christ. It's amazing how your interests will change. I'm interested in how things are going with the people in that church. And it's the same way for any church where I've been. I was in Columbus for 3 years. I was in Kokomo, Indiana for 15 years. I care about how those works are going, how those individuals are doing. I grew up in a church for 22 years where my dad preached. I still care about those people. Why? Because I've invested something in those places and with those people. I care about them because of that investment. If you're not invested in Amazon stock, are you going to be as interested as someone who does invest in Amazon stock? No. You're interested in what you invest in. If you didn't go to Ohio State, are you going to be as interested in their school and in their teams as someone who did? Pick on Cole now. Forgot about you over there, Cole. Give Wesley a break. I didn't go to Ohio State. I don't really care much about what's going on at Ohio State. I'm a Notre Dame fan. I'm an Indiana boy. In Notre Dame football, by the way, #1 recruiting class coming in 2023, just letting you know. But I'm more interested in that. You guys are going to say something to me about that for the rest of the week. It hasn't been very good for a long time. If you will invest more into spiritual work, you're naturally going to be more interested in the results over time. So what I'm telling you is then invest. Invest in your children spiritually, and you will care about their spiritual progress. Why? Because you spent time singing those songs to them when they were sitting there on your lap, and you spent time memorizing those books of the Bible and those 12 apostles and helping them memorize those things. You spent time talking to them every single day after they were at school about the problems they had and the difficulties they were going through and how Christians handle that, how Christians go through that, how they need to look at that through a Christian lens. And even when those children are out of your house, you're going to care about how are my kids doing on a spiritual level? The reason why is you've invested in those kids. You care about how they're doing now because you made a spiritual investment. If you invest in kingdom work financially, you're investing your money and your contribution into the work here, or maybe even supporting preachers abroad elsewhere. You will care about the results that are happening here. You will care about the results that happen globally if you send money to foreign preachers or preachers in other countries or to other works. The people who give to the church are most interested in what the church is doing in its work because they've invested. They're interested. If you don't invest, there's a good chance you don't really care about how things turn out. You invest in hospitality with other people. You have someone to your home. You develop a connection because you've shared your home with one another. You've talked to one another about your lives. You spent time encouraging one another. You are naturally more interested in the lives of those other people. When we were in Columbus, we had a family who came up from Venezuela, and because of the difficult situation that's happening in Venezuela, they were fleeing the country, looking for sanctuary in the United States. And literally just one day, the mother, the wife, her name is Lisette, she just showed up on our doorstep at church one day. And Columbus is a sanctuary city, so it was somewhere that you can and people do go for sanctuary. But she was a member of the church in Venezuela. And when they were in Venezuela, they had successful company. They had 2 houses, before they switched over to the communist socialist type government. They were doing very well. They were hosting preachers in their home. But things changed. The political situation changed, and their lives were at risk because of the situation that had changed. And so they came here. She came first, and the rest of her family, her husband and her 2 children, came a couple months later. But she needed somewhere to live when she came. And we had a basement that was available. And while we had 3 children and they had 2 children, and it was pretty crowded, we had them in our home for a couple of months. But I'm going to tell you what, because we've shared one another's home together, which was actually a great blessing to us, not just to them, because every night we would come home and they would work all day long. And they would come home, and because they felt bad, I think that they were staying in our house, they, after a long day of work, would cook us dinner. And we would share dinner over the table with Google Translate. And they spoke Spanish and Italian, and we spoke English. We would teach each other words, but we would have conversations through the translator every night. But because of that, they're interested in me, and I'm interested in them. Still today, I might have moved away, but that doesn't stop the interest. I'm interested in how they're doing. That's going to happen when you connect to one another over hospitality. Then your hearts begin to connect too. You're interested. You invest in those struggling spiritually. So somebody's not here a lot, or they're having a rough time financially. They've lost a job. They're discouraged. They're grieving over a lost loved one. And you spend the time to talk to them, to encourage them. You're maybe checking on them every day. I promise you that if you will check in with someone every day, and you will become a mentor, someone who's a strength to them, a pillar and a support in their life, then even years down the road, maybe they move away, you move away, years down the road, you will still be connected because of the investment that you made in those people. Your investment will lead to your interest in them. If you invest yourself in personal evangelism, greeting the visitors, contacting the visitors who have been here at assemblies, following up with them, you will be interested in whether or not those visitors come back and continue in the faith and grow in the faith. Because you invest. You invest yourself in Bible classes, youth devos. You may have taught kids when they were 2 and 3 years old in the littlest class, but when those kids are 25 years old, you're still going to be asking mom and dad, how's your kids doing? Because you invested in them. Because you invested in them, you're interested in them. When you invest, you're interested. So the ultimate point is this: invest yourself into spiritual works, and you will be interested in spiritual things. The reason we're not interested is because we're not making any investment of our time, our talents, and our treasures. And so why would we be interested? That's just not how life works. Our heart will be at work if we're invested the most in work, and your heart will be on the ball field if you are invested the most in the ball field. Your heart will be in that music class if that's what you are invested the most in. But if you will invest in this church some, then your heart will be there too. And so are you making the right investments? Ask yourself, am I invested in God's kingdom work? Some spiritual investments that you can make, some practical things you can do. Give to the needy. That's an investment that you can make that God is pleased with. Be hospitable to the neglected. That's an investment that you can make that God is pleased with. Put your mind on Christ, not on the flesh. Start investing in yourself a little bit spiritually. Treasure and obey God's word. That's an investment that's worth more than gold, Psalm 19 says. Be rich in good works and use your money and your things and your house to help other people and to be a benefit to other people. Make those types of investments. As we conclude here, I want to ask you, does your heart seem uninterested sometimes in the people here? Does it seem uninterested in the work here, in the future of the church here? If so, then maybe it's because you need to invest in it more. What fruits indicate the degree and the proof of your investment? What are you doing on a daily basis to invest in God and to invest in his people? If you haven't sacrificed to put your treasure with God and with his people, then your heart will probably not be with him either. Jesus wants your heart. I'm going to close with this passage, 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15. It says this: sanctify the Lord God in your hearts Sanctify means make him special. Make God important. Sanctify the Lord God in your hearts and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. Are you sanctifying the Lord God in your hearts? Is he first in your life? If you want to be a follower of Jesus Christ, the opportunity is yours here today. You need to start. The initial investment starts with this. Believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Confess your faith in him. Turn from your sins. You prove that you truly are interested in following Jesus when you put the life of sin behind and you start living a life following him. Be baptized into Jesus Christ and you'll start walking that new life, living for him, for his purposes and his goals and his will and his ambitions for your life. And you will make his ambitions your ambitions. And if you'll do that, why don't you start doing that this morning? You can do it right now. While together we stand and while we sing.